Can you imagine an entire continent at the peak of its pride, without noticing that something invisible was already moving between its embraces? In the late 15th century, Europe breathed a confidence that felt almost untouchable. Cities like Florence, Rome, and Venice shone with art, trade, and new ideas that made the future seem bright and controllable. The Renaissance brought a sense that the world could be understood, measured, and mastered. The same society that celebrated the human body in paintings and sculpture believed it was finally shaping its own destiny. Streets were loud and alive, filled with markets, taverns, churches, festivities, and constant motion. People traveled more, bought and sold more, and crossed paths with strangers in ways their grandparents never would have imagined. And yet, behind all that vitality, there was a fragility no one wanted to admit. Because when a world feels invincible, it stops looking for danger in ordinary places. It stops listening to small warnings. It assumes tomorrow will behave like today. And that is exactly when a nightmare finds room to enter. The invisible enemy. What if, almost overnight, a disease appeared without warning, and no one even understood how it began? That is how syphilis arrived in Europe's memory. It didn't come with a clear explanation. It didn't announce itself with one simple, unmistakable sign. It moved through people quietly, disguised as confusion. What some saw were strange sores, lingering fevers, unexplained pain, rashes that came and went, and bodies that seemed to betray their owners in unpredictable ways. Some improved for a while and then collapsed again, as if the illness was playing with time. The most terrifying part wasn't just the suffering. It was the uncertainty. Physicians argued and contradicted each other, priests spoke of punishment, and ordinary people filled the empty space with rumors, because fear hates silence. One unsettling detail is how many believed the disease could change its shape, as if it were intentionally hiding from understanding. And in practice, it felt that way. Syphilis moved like a clever shadow. Just when people thought they recognized it, it became something else. The fear grew not from what was known, but from what could not be explained. The year everything broke. Now imagine a war where the real enemy isn't on the battlefield, but inside the bodies that return home. In the final years of the 15th century, during the fighting in Italy, the occupation of Naples by the forces of Charles VIII became the moment the sickness exploded into open history. Soldiers from different regions mixed in crowded camps. They drank together, fought together, celebrated together, and searched for comfort wherever they could find it. The streets of captured cities became crowded with exhaustion and temptation. Then, almost like fire catching dry wood, the illness spread rapidly. And when armies moved, the disease moved with them. It traveled through mercenaries and travelers, across trade roads and ports, slipping into cities like a silent messenger no gate could stop. The most revealing part was how quickly people turned to blame. Each nation tried to name the illness as someone else's curse. Some called it the French disease. Others called it the Neapolitan disease. Nobody wanted to say it belonged to them. But the truth was merciless. Once it began moving, it belonged to everyone. And Europe learned something humiliating in that moment. Borders cannot stop an invisible enemy, and war can spread more than death you can see. The disease that rotted lives. What made syphilis so horrifying wasn't only the pain. It was the patience. It didn't always kill quickly. It didn't always strike like lightning. Sometimes it moved slowly, almost cruelly, taking time to dismantle a person piece by piece. It attacked the body, yes, but it also attacked identity. Faces changed, teeth loosened. Skin revealed marks that could not be explained away. And in a society where reputation was almost a second soul, that kind of change was a public sentence. One shocking detail is how many people tried to hide the signs with powders, paints, and masks, especially among nobles, performers, and those whose livelihood depended on appearance. But hiding wasn't healing. Because the disease could return, deeper and more merciless than before. In later stages, it could invade the mind, bringing confusion, rage, paranoia, and a slow collapse of clarity. Families could be destroyed by suspicion alone, even without proof. Marriages shattered, work was denied, friends disappeared, doors closed quietly. Syphilis became a presence inside the home, like a cruel guest no one invited. And the longer it lasted, the more it felt like a life being erased, without needing to end. The fear of being touched. What if a simple kiss began to feel dangerous? Not because of shame, but because of dread. Syphilis planted a quiet paranoia into everyday life. Touch, once associated with affection and comfort, became a risk. Hugs grew rare. Lovers hesitated. Even casual closeness began to carry suspicion. Desire, so celebrated in Renaissance art, now had a shadow following behind it. In some cities, people whispered that even shared objects could carry the sickness. Cups, utensils, linens, and second-hand clothing became sources of fear, and the marketplace itself could feel unsafe. But the deepest damage wasn't only physical. The fear didn't just poison pleasure. It poisoned trust. People began to question each other's bodies like they were evidence. Who touched whom? Who slept where? Who brought the illness into the neighborhood? Intimacy turned into interrogation, and the human body became a rumor waiting to spread. What once felt spontaneous became calculated. And in the silence between a hand that almost reaches out and then pulls away, a different Europe began to form. More cautious, more suspicious, more distant, shaped by an enemy no one could see. Physicians without answers. Can you imagine seeking a doctor and realizing the doctor is afraid too? Renaissance medicine was proud of its learning, but syphilis shattered that confidence like brittle glass. Many physicians still relied on old theories that explained disease as an imbalance in the body, something that could be corrected through bleeding, purging, or carefully chosen mixtures. But nothing worked reliably. Treatments became a storm of experimentation. Herbs, baths, strange diets, bloodletting, prayers, every method was tried, and most failed. And because authority was part of healing, many doctors avoided admitting ignorance. Instead, they spoke with confidence they didn't possess. One eerie detail is how often the illness was misrecorded as multiple separate diseases, because it didn't follow a single predictable pattern. It looked different from person to person. It moved differently from month to month. So the cure became theater, expensive remedies, dramatic claims, secret recipes. Meanwhile, the streets noticed something unsettling: the collapse of certainty. Because when medicine offers no clear answer, fear grows stronger. And in that era, the absence of answers wasn't just a medical crisis. It was a threat to the very idea of order. The cure that killed. What if hope arrived in the form of poison, and you accepted it anyway? That was the tragic reality of mercury. Across Europe, desperate people clung to it as if it were salvation. Mercury became the famous remedy whispered from city to city, passed from physician to healer, from noble houses to crowded alleys. Patients were rubbed with ointments, sealed in rooms filled with metallic fumes, forced to sweat as if the sickness could be driven out through the skin. Homes filled with a heavy smell, and silence became normal because pain does not invite conversation. A disturbing historical surprise is how many believed the treatment only worked if it caused suffering that was visible. Sweating, drooling, trembling. These were taken as proof the cure was doing something. But mercury did not forgive. Gums bled, teeth fell, bodies weakened, minds blurred, and many survived the disease only to be destroyed by the treatment. It created a cruel choice: live with syphilis slowly consuming you, or risk being consumed faster by the cure. And so, in a Europe that praised progress, some of the most common medical hope looked like punishment, delivered by the hands of those meant to heal. Sin, guilt, and exile. Now imagine becoming sick and being treated as guilty before being treated as human. Syphilis quickly became tied to moral judgment, largely because it was associated with sex. People needed a story that made the fear feel fair. The idea of a disease without meaning felt unbearable, so society gave it meaning through blame. Many decided that those who suffered must have deserved it. The ill were mocked, humiliated, abandoned, denied work, and pushed out of community life. In some places, the shame was so powerful that people disappeared rather than admit symptoms. One of the most painful truths is that exile didn't happen only in public. It happened inside homes, in the way eyes changed, in the way distance was created at the dinner table, in the bed that became separate. Syphilis didn't only scar bodies, it fractured relationships. And when illness becomes a moral sentence, suffering multiplies, because physical pain begins walking beside loneliness. The disease did not only attack flesh, it attacked belonging. It taught people how quickly society can close its doors when fear finds a target. The disease inside the art. What if the fear of a disease became so deep that it began appearing in images, symbols, and collective nightmares? Syphilis entered Renaissance art like a shadow creeping behind beauty. In prints and paintings, it was portrayed as divine punishment, as an invisible arrow, as corruption spreading beneath the skin. The body, once celebrated as masterpiece, was also shown as fragile, vulnerable, temporary, and that shift mattered. A surprising detail is how some artists and writers used the disease not only to express fear, but to criticize society itself. They treated syphilis as a mirror reflecting excess, hypocrisy, violence, and hidden decay. Horror didn't need blood to be powerful. It only needed suggestion. A slightly distorted face, a symbolic wound, a figure of warning in the corner of a scene. And so, among elegant portraits and religious imagery, a quiet message kept returning. Human beauty can be undone, and the invisible can defeat what the world applauds. The plague that changed Europe forever. What if a single disease could reshape how an entire continent thinks, feels, and judges? Syphilis left deep scars, not only because of what it did to bodies, but because of what it forced Europe to confront. It revealed a frightening possibility. Disease can exist without morality, without intention, without divine fairness. Slowly, fear began to make room for a different instinct, curiosity. People needed to understand the body in ways they never had before. Old certainties started to crack. Explanations based purely on guilt and faith began to feel incomplete. Observation, comparison, and the hunger for real causes grew stronger. Syphilis did not create modern medicine alone, but it pushed Europe toward it with relentless force. And the strange part is how familiar the echoes still feel. The instinct to blame, the reflex to isolate, the fear of touch, the panic before the unknown. In the end, syphilis was more than an illness. It was a collective shock that taught, brutally, that humanity cannot control everything, but it can learn when it is forced to look directly at the invisible. Subscribe and comment which forgotten historical nightmare you want reconstructed next, because the past always returns when we stop paying attention.